So firstly, can I say welcome. Lovely setting altogether, and thank you to John for actually organising all of this. And hopefully we're going to have a really good day. In fact, we are going to have a good day, and we're probably going to learn a lot. So just basically to say a few things, we're just going to introduce you to the day, and then a bit of housekeeping, and then we're really going to hand over to John, who's going to do a keynote speech, and then we've got a couple of panels coming up after that then of the farmers themselves, and we'll touch on that in a little minute. But just to introduce myself, I'm Jonathan Birney from Birney Consultancy, and we've had the privilege of being involved in ARCZero from the very start, working with John through the application period and the design of the project, and then the application for funding, to right up to this day, and it's an exciting day. I have to say it's been a really fun project to be involved in, a great group of people, and you'll see from some of the photographs that there was a lot of laughing done, as well as a lot of serious science and work, and it's a tremendous project. And at this time as well, I need to actually say, I'm standing up here taking the glory, but also I need to say actually it was my colleague Ashley Hassan who managed almost all of the facilitation work that we've done for the project throughout this. But the project has been farmer-led, and it's been tremendously exciting to see what's happening, and just to be with such a group of dynamic people. So two of the things I want to say at the start is just very much around emphasising the importance of net zero. We all know the climate challenge that we're facing, and we all know that farmers have the ability to tremendously impact what happens to the environment on their farm, to their outputs, and they just have so much potential to do good. And we have a moral obligation to do that, but I would also say we also have a market obligation, because in the longer term, our industry is going to have to defend itself to the customer. And one of the really exciting things about doing environmental work is that it's also almost completely lined up with the whole production side of things as well. There's a lot of sort of myth out there that the two are contradictory, but actually the really good work can put the two together and have tremendously high-performing environmental farms as well as tremendously high-performing food production farms. And we must remember that food production is at the core of farming, but we need to do it as well as we can. And there's so much research that's been done out there to really underpin a lot of the work that has been done in ARCZero. But one of the challenges is that often it's not necessarily tested under real-world farm conditions. It's often, the practicalities of it can be challenging. And that's one of the exciting things about working then with development farms, because true farm research does need to be delivered at farm level as well and proven. And as I say, the farmers in this group are just tremendous, and you're going to see them later on as they talk through what has happened on their farm, through their understanding, through the changes they have made, through the challenges that still exist. And by no means are we going to present a finished picture here, but we're at the start of something that is really tremendous. And you will see a lot of the reasoning and thinking that has been, shall we say, developed throughout the whole side of the project. And what I'm going to say is my delightful computer has just switched off. But essentially, we've got 7 farmers in this, and what we did want to say was this is very much about 7 farmers stepping up. This is the industry stepping up to the plate, recognising that we need to take control, and that we can take control, and that we can deliver tremendous benefits. And hopefully that will come out and across to you today through the keynote speech, and then as the farmers discuss. Now, what we will say, it's going to be very interactive today. You are going to have the opportunity to ask questions. And as you do, obviously, hopefully they will be focused on learnings that you can have, or potentially additional things that could be done into the next phase of the project, because this isn't the start, this is only the beginning, and that's the exciting part about it. So, essentially then, just to run you through 2 or 3 things about what are going to happen during the day. So as I say, you are going to have a chance to listen to John. You will have 10 minutes after John's speech really to ask a few questions and to bounce back, and there are roving mics that will go around. We will then head into our first panel session, and again, the farmers will talk a little bit of what they've done. It will be managed by John McClellan from the UFU, and he will also take questions from the floor. And so if you have a burning question, please do ask it. And then we're going to take a little bit of a break and a bit of networking, because one of the things you have to do with a day like this is to talk to people and learn and challenge each other. So we're going to have a chance to do that as well. Back into another panel, and then into a bit of a wash-up with both Norman Fulton from Derry, this Department of Agriculture and Environmental Affairs, for those of you that actually aren't from Northern Ireland. And then we're going to finish, obviously, with, again, from John McClellan, just giving a bit of an outline and a sum-up from the day from his perspective. So that's the day. The housekeeping now. Firstly to say, if you need the toilet at any time, it's just out to the right and along. You will see them. They look very like toilets, and they are. So you'll be able to get there if you're stuck. What we will say as well is when we finish this conference part and we're going to the farm walk, if it is too much for you going up the hill, we're not going to highlight anybody in that, but there is going to be a tractor and trailer out there, a nice bright orange one, hard to miss. And you can get in the back of that, and that will go up and down and take you up and down the hill if you want that as well. The only other thing I'm going to say is that you can download the booklet for today for the farm walk, and it's to be downloaded from ARCZeroEI.org. Now, some of you will obviously have 4G or 5G down here, some of you won't. There is Wi-Fi available up at the centre where you actually come in, and that's actually where the farm walk is starting from as well. So at the end, you will need to go to the top to basically start the farm walk. But hopefully, I will keep you to time during the day. Now, somebody said to me at the start, what is going to be the hardest part of your facilitation today? And there's only one answer to that, really. It's keeping John Gilliland to time. So Professor Gilliland is going to now come up, and he's going to be very disciplined in the time that he uses. And we'll be giving him quite a number of warnings as we go along, I would imagine. So, John, can I ask you now to come up and give your keynote speech? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. What Jonathan didn't allude to say is the reason you have to download it is that I didn't do my homework in time to have it all sent to the printer. So, hey-ho, my apologies to you all. Well, good, that works. So, why have I brought you the whole way to the northwest? I noticed passports were shown at the Ponderosa coming over Glen Shane. Why have I brought you all the way here and then made you walk 400 meters down into this walled garden? Well, the reason I've done that is actually, regardless of the fact that this subject today is about 7 farmers on a journey to net zero, but those 7 farmers produce food. And the structure that this marquee sits within, the walled garden, is the oldest walled garden in Ireland. It was built in the mid-1600s. Most walled gardens were actually built in the 18th and 19th century. And the reason we know that is the city of Derry is infamous for one particular thing, and that was the siege of Derry in 1689. And the siege of Derry, one of the key things to besiege the city is you starve it. And they used a boom of floating oak trees, which was actually located between here and the Foyle Bridge behind. But it actually is one of the widest parts of the river. The narrowest bit of the river is down in Culmore Point. And the reason they had to put the boom here is this walled garden was built by the merchants of London to feed their families within the walls of the city. So this walled garden, 3.5 acres, fed a city up to 1689. What would you need today to feed a city? And I think that's really relevant as we talk about our journey to net zero. Because our journey to net zero isn't just about getting to net zero, it's about delivering multiple public goods, of which food is fundamentally the very first one. So enjoy your surroundings today. David, my son, and Richard, who leads the farm here, have bent over backwards to try and get into some shape so that it was respectable for you to come here, and you'll meet them during the day. So it's my pleasure, or should I say, I was the last one standing when my other 6 farmers heard the music stop and sat in their seats, which meant I got the short straw. You have to listen to me, and they only have to answer questions later on. So it'll be payback time. Make sure you have plenty of awkward questions for them, okay? And they're very shy, okay? So who is ARCZero? Well, ARCZero is a team of 7 farmers, as I say. Roger and Hilary Bell, sheep farmers from with a bit of beef in Kells in County Antrim. Simon Best is a predominantly arable farmer with a bit of beef down in Points Pass. Patrick Casement, and Patrick actually, interestingly, is a landlord, and he farms with Trevor, who's his tenant, and really important because 35% of our acreage in Northern Ireland is in a tenancy situation. So we need landlord-tenant relationships to come with us. Patrick and Trevor farm suckler cows and sheep. John Egerton and his family farm down in Fermanagh, really produce really good quality beef genetics in calf heifers, their main enterprise. Myself, as a willow farmer with some dry stock, Hugh Harbison as a dairy farmer up in Ahadui, and Ian McClellan as a dairy farmer in Banbridge. What we wanted to do, for some reason, poor County Tyrone got left out. Don't know what happened there, not deliberately. But what we've got is 7 farmers, geographically different enterprises, different soil types, different climates. And really what we wanted to see is what happened when you started the baseline farms. You know, what is the impact of different enterprises? What is the different impact on different soils and different climates? Putting the finances up front, this could not have happened without the support that we got through the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, from the European Commission under the European Innovation Programme. And we are indebted to the £120,000 that we secured through a competition, an open competition. We're one of 7 EIP projects, as they're called. And this could not have happened, would not have happened. The only thing I would say, just a little caution to Deirdre, when you do it again, don't launch it 2 weeks into a lockdown in a pandemic, please. I have to say, some of us had to learn Zoom in a quicker than most other people. So we came together, we're Zoom babies, okay, as a product of what happened. But it's also important to note that actually the 7 of us, when we went on this journey, actually really got inspired by the journey we were going on. We put another 80,000 of cash to it, and then there's another 80,000+ of our own time put into this project. So this project has cost us just over £250,000, and specifically is about us as 7 farmers stepping up to the plate and actually having a go at it. We are fed up being made a pariah, and what we want to do is show that we can actually deliver what society needs of us. But we could not have done that without the support of 4 key organisations. ARCZero, and I'm delighted their chairman, Professor Jerry Boyle, is here. Jason Rankin and his team, and you saw them beavering away up at the car park and the registration and all the work they helped with us in getting this here. Bernie Consultancy, Jonathan's already introduced himself. Ashley's been shy as ever, the back with the camera. Devonish. Without Devonish, we couldn't have done this. Devonish, I had 9 extraordinary years with Devonish. We took a farm of land in County Meath called Douth, and we made it a real success. What we've now done is taken that knowledge and said, what happens if you put that on 7 other farms of different types of farms? So I'm indebted to the journey I had with Devonish and for the latitude that Devonish gave to me. And lastly, Queen's University and the Institute of Global Food Security. I have to say that anyway because they gave me some little title last year, but I'm indebted to actually the rigour that particularly Professor Nigel Scolan, who alas has sent us apology, he had the inconsiderate thing to start a European project today, and he prioritised them over us. So he's really off my Christmas card list, I have to say. But without him, the science rigour wouldn't have been there. So we're indebted to that. So when you go on a journey like this, it's really important that you actually define what your goal is. So for us, our title is Accelerating Towards Net Zero. So what does net zero mean? And in my career, I've actually done a lot of public presentations, and it comes as no surprise. I would say 80% of the people I speak with actually don't know the definition of net zero. And it is actually written in legislation if people want to go and look at it. But I'm going to give you a farmer's take of it, and you can criticize me afterwards to say I'm wrong. So net zero for the ARCZero project is where we measure our gross annual greenhouse gas emissions. We try and measure in some way, and I'll talk in more detail, what is our annual carbon sequestration. We take one from the other, and then we adjust it for any carbon dioxide that we've displaced by putting renewables in, or anything in waste management. Now, none of us actually have AD plants, whatever, but it is that principle that actually net zero isn't a one ticket of just reducing emissions. Net zero is about unshackling farming businesses and allowing them to reduce their emissions, allowing them to build their carbon stocks, allowing them to put renewables in, allowing them to put in waste management into it. And when you put all that together, when we get that to zero, that is net zero. It is not about zero emissions. Because if zero emissions, well, there's no need for us, because we emit too. Okay? So we need to get our definition right. So how do we go about it? So what did we do? And our big problem on this journey is none of us knew our numbers. We might have known our numbers in regards live weight gain or kilos of milk per day, but we didn't know our greenhouse gas emissions. We didn't know what carbon was on our farm. So really, our focus right at the start was to carry out comprehensive baselines and then benchmark them. So we would know our numbers. And it's based on the principle, if you know your numbers, you make better quality decisions. If you make better quality decisions, you make more money. But also, too, you actually go on your journey towards net zero. And that is absolutely fundamental. To allow us to do that, we then have to reach for tools we've never used before, life cycle assessment calculators. And as many of you know, there are many out there. I think the last I heard there were about 60 out there, okay? And I get asked so many times, well, which one do I pick? It's all confusing to me, okay? So when people ask me, I said, well, whatever calculator you're looking at, I would just ask 5 questions of that calculator. And when you work through those questions, you actually end up with 1 or 2 calculators. The other 60 sort of disappear. So the first thing for me, is it independent? Okay? No disrespect to any company out there wanting to buy carbon credits or natural capital. I'm not going to sell you that if you're doing my measurement. You're not independent. I want it independent. Second of all, is it accredited? Most people aren't aware there is actually a British Standard Institute and now an ISO standard on accreditation for calculators. So is it accredited? Thirdly, which is very important, particularly for ruminant agriculture, does it report its methane emissions not only on the global warming potential over 100 years, but actually the global warming potential star, as it's called, because methane is a short-lived gas, it's not a long-lived gas, and there's recognition from the United Nations and from the UK's Climate Change Committee that we're currently not calculating methane correctly. And Miles Allen from Oxford University has championed a different way. It's called GWP star. And some stage, the United Nations will make a determination. And really what we want is at least to see what does it look like in both scenarios, okay? Then we'll know when a determination is made, then we can see where we're sitting. But we've got it embedded, the process, okay? The fourth thing is, does it include carbon sequestration? Because for all the reasons that I've mentioned earlier on about my definition of net zero, we're not only asking farmers to reduce their emissions, we are asking them to build their carbon stocks too. So how do we measure that? Does it look at that? And lastly, just like ARCZero is on a journey, so are the calculator providers on a journey. We will get more knowledge, we'll get more detail, and we need them to improve their calculator. So it's really important as this new knowledge and data sets come forward that those calculator providers actually go on the journey with us and that it is science-driven behind. So we put calculators through that. We chose AgriCalc supported by SRUC. There are others out there, but that is the one we chose. So when you go and put your numbers into this, what does it look like? So I'm not going to go into depth in each individual farm, but what I am going to give you is a global view of the 7 of us. So you can see the 7 farms listed there. You can see the enterprises, and in the red bubble, you can see gross emissions. Now, straight off like that, so what? What does that mean? Okay? Now, when you go on this exercise, one of the advantages about going on this exercise is it does tell you some interesting information. Is first of all, where are your emissions coming from? Because we have a collection of different enterprises, just to give you a degree of spread, our dairy emissions, what you can see is the majority is actually coming from methane production. If you go to an arable end, so you go to wheat, the majority of it is actually carbon dioxide in what goes into making the fertilizers, the fuel, in whatever. So it's really important, each farm, it's really important that each farm actually knows where their emissions are coming from. Also, it's really important that you get some understanding how you compare to your peers within your enterprises. So within AgriCalc, they actually give us the ability to benchmark where, well, some of us are. They have nothing about willows for some reason, funny crop. But anyway, but at least gives us some understanding of where, when we started this journey, where were we vis-a-vis the mean of the others that have gone through the calculator. Okay, so now we at least have an understanding. And you know something, if you're going to go on a trip, on a journey like this, the one thing you don't do is you go and panic and find 6 other farmers in the middle of a pandemic. And you also go and find ones that are in sort of mean or lower quartile. I happen to pick ones that predominantly are either average or really good, which means we've set the bar even higher. When you've got some in the top quartile, trying to get them further is even harder. It's easy to take someone from the lower quartile and improve them. So we set ourselves quite a challenge, okay? So what we then asked AgriCalc to do is to engage their carbon sequestration calculator. Now, it's caveated. It is to tier 1, and I'll talk about tiers in a moment or two a bit more. So it's not as accurate as the emissions, which are to tier 2. But the reason we wanted to do this, and remember when we started on this, greenhouse gas emissions were only to tier 1 as well. Okay, so they've been on an earlier journey, so they've gone from tier 1 to tier 2, and hopefully they'll get to tier 3. Carbon sequestration is the new boy in town, and it's only tier 1, with the hope it'll get to tier 2, and it will get to tier 3. So again, you can see the amount of sequestration worked out by the tier 1 calculator in, I don't know, is that, I just hope it's not mine. So when you do that then, you at least then can start to pull the narrative together. So what's the gross emissions? What's the gross sequestration? What's the net emissions? So what's the difference? Now, I haven't put renewables in this at the moment, and I haven't put in waste management in this. But what you can see is no 2 farms are the same. So there's no one single prescription that you can give to farming and say, go and do it. Every farm is in a different place. Some farms will find this journey a lot easier than others. And we need to understand that, because remember, the target of net zero by 2050 is about the mean of the industry getting to zero. That makes the assumption that some will be way beyond it and some won't get there. But you have some kind of way that averages it out, and there's some way that the carbon price is recognized. And surprisingly, some farms are already beyond net zero today. And that's never talked about. And you won't know that until you go and measure. So know your numbers. Within ARCZero, we have a desire that the current calculators are a great starter for 10. But they use these factors, which are basically tools to average people's data. The problem about averaging is you put good and bad all together. And if you're trying to get pioneers, early adopters to continue to move on ahead, you actually want to capture their data and not average it. And to do that, you really need to get to Tier 3. So I've mentioned these before. What do we mean? So these factors that the whole thing was designed by the United Nations back in 1990 when we started this journey. Tier 1 factor is very crude. It averages all us internationally. So a cow in Mumbai is the same as a cow in Buenos Aires, which is the same as a cow in Ahadu. And you and I know that's rubbish. So Tier 2 is when you actually do it at a national level. So now we're looking at a cow in Cornwall, a cow in Aberdeen, and a cow in Banbridge. Okay? Now, the variation is less, but there's still a variation. And Tier 3 is when you really bring it down to the local level. And for us, certainly, particularly around carbon sequestration, our knowledge in carbon sequestration is very poor. And for us, what we wanted to do, alongside the work we've done on AgriCalc, is start the journey of creating baselines of our carbon stocks under the soil, in our trees and hedges, and do it really with forensic detail so that, hopefully, if we can rattle a money tree somewhere, we will repeat this in 5 years' time. And we will see difference. Maybe good difference, maybe bad difference, but we will see difference. Okay? And so really, at the core of what we're doing is putting in robust baselines on every individual farm. And I make no apologies for focusing on the carbon sequestration and stock side, because it is the poor brethren for knowledge out there, okay? So it has been helped by the fact that over the last 5-10 years, new technologies have appeared that allow us to measure at scale. I'm going to single out two. There are others out there. The two, and the first time I got to see this on the left-hand side of your screen, is aerial LiDAR. I had the pleasure of experiencing it with Devonish and in Douth in County Meath. The site we ran there, a World Heritage site, and archaeologists brought this to us. It's a real sharing of knowledge. But if you scan your landscape at 15 to 40 scans per meter compared to a satellite at 1 scan per 10 square meters, the resolution that you get to actually measure the 3-dimension of your land. And I'll show you a little bit of Brook Hall in a moment. The second was a company from Dundee called AgriCarbon, who Patrick and I bumped into in Groundswell last year. And they had this wacky piece of kit that could take a core of our soil down to 1 meter, if it didn't hit some rock first, and could bring it out in a core and allow us to measure carbon stocks in 0 to 15 centimeters, 15 to 30 centimeters, 30 to 60 centimeters, and beyond for the first time at a price point that allows us to do big-scale soil testing. And you'll see their kit later on today. Just to give you a feel for this, this is the LiDAR image for Brook Hall. We're down at the bottom in the walled garden at the moment. So this is the 3D image, courtesy of Alex Higgins of AFBI, who last isn't here today. And so from this, we get this 3-dimension. And what's really interesting, some of you see I grow this funky crop called willows. And you can see the willows at different stages. You can see my silver pasture. You can see my long-term permanent deciduous woodland, all at different heights. So when you get an image like this, you can then create a carbon asset register for your trees and hedges. This is mine for Brook Hall. I have 2.38 kilometers of hedges. I've got 47.9 hectares of trees in some form, shape, or size. But you can see above the ground and associated below ground biomass, I've got just over 1,300 tons of carbon. And the plan is to repeat this in 5 years' time to see what the score is, okay? When you do your soils, you don't need to know the detail on this, but what you can see is we've stratified our landscape into land use categories and land management categories. And lo and behold, on my farm, when you add all this out, I have 5,300 tons of carbon under my soil. If I add my trees to it and then convert it to carbon dioxide equivalents, we, David and I, are managing in this farm 24,405 tons, thereabouts, of carbon. And the plan will be Hopefully, when I come back in 5 years' time, I might have 27 or 28,000 tonne. Okay? But we now know where it is. We now know where the low-hanging fruit is. So we now know our numbers. When I give you the global view of the 7 of us, the 7 of us together are managing just over 500,000 tonnes of carbon stocks within a landscape. When do you ever hear that in the public narrative about us as farmers, as land managers? And really, the trick for us, and quite interestingly, and I'm passionate about trees, and for all the trees, even on mine, only 80% of it is still in the soil. On most farms, 97% of the carbon is in the soil. Much as I love trees, okay? You cannot neglect the soil. And here's my challenge to us 7, is do you think when we come back and do it in 5 years' time, we could have 540,000 tonnes? No? So we can now start to put targets around it. I should say, my carrot in that, for all you in the audience, if we do achieve 540,000 tonnes, will your systems be sophisticated enough to accept our data? And will we get rewarded for it? And I think that's a conversation, not necessarily for the day, but it is a conversation about how do we reward positive behavioral change on this journey. Key on this journey is then, in the absence of farmers being paid for carbon, is actually knowing our costs in regards to options. And I know Jerry Boyle's sitting in the audience and he'll kick me because I've used the UK one and not an Irish one, but both UK and Ireland did a lot of work around MAC curves, and Gary Lanigan did a great part of work for Chagas. But I'm using this as an illustration. This is a thing called a marginal abatement cost curve. You don't need to know all the data, but what you do need to know is the vertical bars are mitigation options. The x-axis is halfway up, because on the y-axis what you've got is cost. And some of these options are a negative cost, in other words, a profit, and some of them are positive. And what you can actually, and then the width of the bars is how useful that technology is in getting total emissions down for our sector. So the stuff over on this side, I think that's my left hand, are the win-wins, where I can reduce my greenhouse gas emissions and drive my profits. And so our focus on ARCZero, no apologies, is that's the bit we've been focusing on. That's where the win-wins are, okay? But at some stage, we're going to have to go to the right-hand side of the MAC curve. And that is where the cost is really going to bite. And I will argue some of our ARCZero farmers are already flirting with that at the moment. And we need to get our heads round, if we seriously want farming to get to net zero, how do we allow farmers to recoup the cost of getting to net zero? Because there will be a cost, and if that's not recognized, you know something, you will struggle to get us to net zero. And we need to get our head around that. So what are the options we've looked at? Well, again, we make no apologies. Improving efficiency was number 1. Better genetics, age of slaughter, cow size, animal health, all really good management, things that we should be doing anyway. Driving efficiency, number 1. Second of all, in soils, and I'm going to sing, particularly under livestock agriculture, your pH is rubbish. And actually focusing on improving soil pH. Why? Because your nutrient efficiency, your nutrient uptake efficiency is totally influenced by soil pH. But also too, when you improve, and maybe Patrick will tell his story, if when you improve pH on old swards, things like legumes reappear. And actually, if you really want to drive an industry where you're using less synthetic nitrogen and driving legumes, get that soil pH up over 6.5. Increasing the use of legumes on multi-species swards. Reducing the use of nitrogen fertilizer. Planting more trees and hedgerows. And you'll see a bunkers project after lunch of ours, grazing willow trees. And we have some team will talk about that later on. And although most of us have not looked at it yet, we are all getting our heads around installing renewables on our farms as well. So, what have we observed? We've had funding for 2.5 years. We've been going a bit longer because we had to put a bid in. We had to go through a vetting process and whatever else. And, we've asked a lot of the 7 of us to get some results in a short period of time. I will argue our process of AgriCalc and redoing AgriCalc. So we did it in 2021 and 2023. I would argue that actually when you do your first benchmark, you should probably wait for 3 years, not 2 years, because by the time you get your results, you're halfway through the year that you're already in. And if you're going to start making changes, it takes a while for that to kick in as well. So what you can see here is that the farms I've highlighted, the 2 farms not highlighted have different priorities because they're already beyond net zero and they're trying to see where they want to go. All the farms have made progress. All the farms have made progress. Some have made significant progress, okay? But there were determining factors around this journey. Who would have thought when we started this that nitrogen fertilizer would have gone to £1,000 a ton, okay? You know something? That helped us, okay? Every storm has a silver lining somewhere. Hopefully not, well, hopefully we'll see this afternoon when the thunder comes. Second of all, timing of sowing of legumes. A lot of the guys and girls have put legumes in, but some of them only went in last September, so that's not caught in the 2023 AgriCalc, okay? So if we had done AgriCalc in 2024, I think you would have seen further improvements, okay? Also, too, things like nobody can determine when you have a livestock infection or whatever, okay? And sadly, 1 or 2 of the herds had a bit of ill health, and that, livestock health is fundamental to sustainability. And we cannot do enough around good animal health. Our job at the end of the day as farmers is, although we've been focusing on net zero, we don't have the luxury of looking at our journey to net zero through a single issue lens. We have to deliver multiple public goods. And for us, and it was also part of the judging criteria, which helps, for us, we had to deliver other environmental goods. And one of the beauties of using LiDAR to measure our trees and hedges is using the same data set, but with a different piece of software, we can create these extraordinary colorful maps. Now, this one is created by Rachel Cassidy of AFBI. It's actually of Hugh Harbison's Derry farm. And what this shows is the runoff risk on his farm during extreme rainfall. So the yellow and red that you see on this, so the gray bit is the naked LiDAR. So you can digitally rub out every blade of grass, every tree, every hedge with LiDAR. So you can see the interconnectivity of where surplus water runs off your land, okay? And the yellow and red, that's our runoff risk. The difference is the red is a critical source area. So it's also where there are elevated levels of phosphate in the soil. So when water's waterlogged, some of that comes up and also flows as well. And so Hugh's farm, normally, this bit is just one field of Hugh's. He's got a lot of really good stuff, so not trying to run Hugh down. I'm particularly focused on this because Hugh himself, having seen that, and also having listened to his issue about nitrogen fertilizer, Hugh decided he was going to plant some multi-species. Now, he came up with the idea, John, I've seen my runoff risk maps. Why don't I plant the multi-species in the area of runoff risk? Because what happens with chicory and with red clover, they have huge, long roots. And what we know is when you plant those, you can increase water infiltration rate or speed by up to 14 times faster. So what you really want, you can never stop all the water running off your land. But if you have the first flush going into the soil and not into the water course, that is where your nutrient is. So, Hugh's classic example, he got better information, he made a really good decision, and that is his first multi-species swards went into his key area of overland flow. And that is a multiple win. That's a multiple public good win. And that's really the beauty of the journey that we've been on. But also, too, on biodiversity. And so many times I go, and we have a biodiversity crisis, but most people talk to me about birds and bees. They forget that half the biodiversity outside is under the soil. So one of the key things we've been doing here in this farm, we had a fantastic master's student from Wagram University here for 4 months. And off he went, and he's done an extraordinary soil health survey here. And just looking at 2 indicators of soil health on our farm, we have 5 totally different land uses at Brook, and you'll hear more about that after lunch. If we look at earthworms, well, lo and behold, there's one very tall bar there. Surprise, surprise, it's in the area where I know my pH is good. Earthworms like good pH. And second of all, it's in the area that I have big animals defecating and inoculating my soil biology. Okay? Really important, that circular nature. If I then look at our bacterial fungi ratios, which you can see on the right-hand side, again, the area where I've got good soil pH and I have big animals defecating, I have some of the best soil biology. So, coming to the end, one of the key things that we were asked to do, and we've actually got great enjoyment of doing it, is sharing ARCZero's journey. We've had 7 public farm walks, well, 6 and hopefully 1 this afternoon. We've had over 1,000 visitors from 6 different countries. I want to make 3 thanks. One is, first of all, to the host farmers, and I'll come back and talk about them in a moment. The second one is to ARCZero, who are fantastic. If you want to organize a farm walk, Jason and the team, you're fantastic. To Caffrey, Gary Haslam and his team, I see some of the team here in the audience today. We could not have done it without your help, but also that professionalism as well. So thank you to both organizations. At the back end of each of those farm walks, we do impose on the people who come. The great thing about doing things through Eventbrite is we get their email addresses. So that means that we can go back out with a post-farm walk questionnaire. So just to highlight a few here, this is taken from some of the feedback. So question 3 here, how well do you think the event was organized and run? And I haven't even put my glasses on. Well, I think the top one says, very well, well, and okay. We know poorlies, so we did well, okay? But you can see the lion's share. In the case, please rate the content of the event. 2 scientific, about right, and 2 basic. So again, great to see that vote of confidence about the level of that. Question 5, please rate the delivery of the event content around the speakers. And what you can see there, green is excellent, blue is very good, orange is good, and pale blue is fair. Again, no pearly, but I think that is a very good reflection of the people who attended the farm walks. We got many supplementary comments, but I've singled out one because I actually feel this encapsulates everything that we had fed back to us. Found the walk to be very current, interesting and informative. Speakers were clear to the point, no waffle. Helped by having a host who is walking the walk and not talking the talk. Excellent farm walk. Now, I have to say, that brings to the core. You're going to see all 7 of us up in 2 batches here. And they'll pretend to be shy. Okay, you need to tease. But you see when they're on their own farm, and they have people on their own farm, they find an extra gear. Okay? And I can tell you, certainly of the 6 so far, the host farmers have been stunning. And my thanks to all the guys and girls who helped on those. Because I think the quantity and quality of media space that we got afterwards is a reflection of what these guys and girls did in sharing their journeys openly, transparently, and passionately. But we also went beyond this. John, where's John? Where's he hiding? John is a prolific writer. I don't know, and I'm not to give one organization a plug, but he writes in a certain journal, and got the hint. And John writes some extraordinary pieces, well worth to see. But actually, he wrote a very personal reflection of the time that agricarbon came to Fermanagh to actually take the soil cores out. And John is a fantastic livestock producer. I think this was a revolution, seeing your soils and whatever else. But so many people got to see this, okay? And fantastic way of communicating. Simon has been a shoulder to the wheel in regards beyond here. So Simon last year presented at Douth with Devenish to the global network of lighthouse farms. So 11 lighthouse farms from 5 continents in the world. And quite interestingly, a little known organization called LEAF, based in England, have reached out to ARCZero and asked ARCZero for some guidance on their program. Now, Simon is a LEAF farmer, but certainly Simon is giving a presentation fairly shortly to LEAF farmers about his experience. I do suggest to LEAF that they're only doing half a job and not a whole job, but they're not doing carbon sequestration. So nil point for me, but anyway. And I had the privilege of being invited last September to the United Nations in Geneva. And an extraordinary experience, and I shared the platform with a very infamous guy from California, Professor Frank Mitloner, leader of methane production, or methane reduction in the United States. And what most of you won't be aware is last week the United Nations wrote to me again, and I've been asked to give them an update in August in Geneva of the work of ARCZero. So really fantastic to see that level of engagement. So what's next? Well, we have a desire to keep going. We feel we've got halfway up a mountain. And we have 2 choices. We either come back down with the tail between our legs, or we keep going, okay? Now, we can't do it on our own, because we're going into that win-lose, okay? So I know there's some funders in this room, okay? We'll be coming, okay? So just your cards are marked, okay? The second thing is, we want to build on the win-wins, okay? We want to secure funding to explore the win-loss or lose. We would like to repeat AgriCalc for a 3rd time. Now, if I had my wish, I would have done it after 3 years and then after 2 years. 3 years because you need that extra year to get your head around what is it saying, what does it mean to me, and then do it ever after. We would like to continue to be entrepreneurial, innovative, and actually look further at improving our soil health, because actually without good soil health, we cannot have good forage and crop output, and actually getting the nutrient balance and getting that right through to human health. One health. But also, 2, we want to continue to prove to society out there that if you give farmers a chance, if you unshackle them and you empower them, they will actually deliver what society wants, as long as society recognizes they also need to make a living. I want to finish at this stage, and I want to say thank you again to our 4 supporting organizations, AgriSearch, Bernie Consulting, Devenish, and Queen's, but also to our funders, and Norman's going to represent the funders later on as such. Without you and the catalyst, this wouldn't have happened. So I'm going to stop there now, Jonathan. I noticed you didn't reach and unplug me. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk as little as I feel I need to in this next part of a panel discussion. I'm going to ask 4 of our panel farmers here to actually introduce themselves and tell us a little bit. We've told them in sort of 2-3 minutes about their journey so far in this process, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. And I want this to be a discussion. We've already had 3 really good questions. That's what I'd like to see continuing. I don't want to be asking questions. I want to just direct your questions. So whenever we come to that point, if you want to again just stand up, say who you are, maybe where you're from, if you're happy doing that. If you don't want to, it doesn't matter. And if you want to direct your question to a particular individual, you can do that, or else I'll direct it for you to who I think maybe is the most appropriate. But that's the way I'd like it to happen. So I'll maybe start just with beside me here, Patrick, and then you can just follow on, just say who you are and what you've been doing in the process so far.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrick Casement. I have a farm just outside Ballycastle in North Antrim. I farmed it myself for 30 years, sucklers and sheep, but now I've decided I've done a generation's worth, as it were, and I've stepped aside and I let the land to a neighbour, and we farm, I think, really more or less in partnership. Rather, it's not perhaps a typical Conacre agreement in that respect. And I think of myself as a land manager now. My tenant farms much the same as I did, with sucklers and sheep. He's a bit more specialised in the sheep that he has than I was. And I'm very fortunate in that I have a very sandy soil. So in this climate, it has some advantages. It has other disadvantages. It doesn't hold nutrients very well. It doesn't retain its pH very well. But a lot of pluses there as well. I also have a lot of woodland, and so about 20% of my land is under woodland or trees, and that has made a huge difference. I don't know if you saw the figures earlier, you were able to read them, but by remarkable series of manipulations of figures, have reached net zero already. But I have also been introducing multi-species swards on my farm, and I've done a huge program of liming to bring the pH up, which has had a remarkable effect on clover and legumes, as John mentioned earlier, which has actually been one of the factors that has boosted me over the net zero line. There we are.
I'm glad to see you here. You and I had a conversation yesterday, and you was saying there's still tickets available for the last day of the Ashes, and he quite fancied being an Edgbaston today, and I thought it'd be a good idea, both of us. So only the fact that you, John Gillian, would probably come and drag us back again. So great to have you here, Hugh. So.
Can I just point out that was John's idea, not mine? How's it going? My name's Hugh Harbison. I'm the second dairy farmer in this group after Ian. He's a leading dairy farmer. We're milking about 180 odd calving cows in Ackadoo, which is between Corian and Garva, not far from Patrick, maybe as the crow flies across the north. We're milking 180 autumn calving cows, calving them all in 12 weeks, very strict autumn calving block. We're chasing milk solids from our cows, so we've got a crossbred cow, and we're doing about 8,000 litres off about 2 tonnes of purchased feed. Like all farms in Northern Ireland, we're always trying to reduce our costs and trying to make ourselves more efficient. As John says, we've introduced multi-species swards over the past few years, and our farm is, the first to say, it's very clover poor. So we've been trying to introduce clover over this past few years, fueled by what you've heard there over the nitrogen fertiliser prices, but I'm probably a self-confessed addict to sowing artificial fertiliser. So it's been a hard one to try and bring down over this past few years, because we obviously need a lot of winter forage for our cows over the winter time. But we've been trying to reduce that all the time, and we're chasing good quality milk from our cows, trying to graze them as much as possible and make good quality silage. The ARCZero journey has been really interesting for me. It's been a real education. Whenever John phoned me at the start, I thought he was nuts. Whenever he phoned me back in 2020, but he's dragged us all kicking and screaming, and it's been a real education for us to personally see where our missions are coming from and where we can improve, and what carbon we have locked up in our trees and hedges. So, like Patrick, we've got about 4 hectares of deciduous woodland and about 18 kilometres of hedges throughout the farm. So we're always trying to improve. We've no desire to get any bigger on our farm. We're just trying to get better all the time. So that's just a bit about our farm.
How you doing? My name's Ian McClellan, farm down near Banbridge. Have just about 100 cows, and would be pushing more for, although we're going for fats and proteins, we also want litres on our farm. And trying to push for 10,000 litres off 3.2 tonne a meal or thereabouts. The farm's all grassland, and we try and keep it as, we're not looking to grow any different crops. We're trying to grow as much grass as we can. And as John would say, that, as you said, we have an addiction to fertiliser, but all of my past years, we have been told that fertiliser is the gold stuff and we need to sow it. And by all accounts and by all industries, we've been told this. So, but listen, there is ways to get around it, and clover is one of them. And our farm, we've sowed a lot of clover just in the last 2 years. So we'll hopefully be reducing and have reduced our chemical fertiliser input a whole lot last year, but maybe slightly to do with cost as well last year. So, but that's from me.
Hello, I'm John Edgerton from County Fermanagh, probably the most westerly of the farmers, and I would always argue that under the most challenging conditions, I don't always get away with that, but we're certainly not looking for any rain. This weather's suiting us very nicely. If it doesn't rain to September, that's grand by us. We farm suckler cows. My son William's here with me as well. I have 3 sons, and as John says, he's farming for his grandchildren or looking after the environment for his grandchildren. Well, I have 3 boys, and I'm doing it all for them. We have about 90 suckler cows, mixed autumn and spring calving. We have 260 breeding ewes. We've also a blade calf rearing enterprise, and we also finish beef cattle as well. For years I've been involved with the Irish Farmers Journal, and we've been pushing the farm efficiently as possible. The 3 boys now, William's over 30 now, so they're all come into the farm business. When the 3 boys were born, I thought, well, possibly one of them might have an interest in farming, but all 3 have an interest in farming. And that's probably the biggest driver with us. Ultimately, the farm has to be financially sound so that we can sustain a living for us all. We have about 200 acres or thereabouts, and unlike you, we're trying to get bigger and trying to get more efficient. Things that we have done, we've sowed a lot of lime, introduced multi-species, which has been difficult given our weather conditions, but we're not giving up on it yet. Trying to stitch in white clover into the grazing swards, and trying to introduce red clover into the silage swards. We can see the green shoots of improvement there, and the journey has been so far has been wonderful. The only downside is, and as you can see in the audience here, there's not a lot of farmers in the audience. It's more business people, and farmers need to get engaged in this. But I think this is probably down to the way the political situation has been. Farmers have been attacked with a big stick and lambasted on what's going to happen with the carbon, and they're going to have to reduce livestock, and where that may not be the case. It's time for the farmers follow our lead and stand up for yourself. We have a good story to tell, and we have the solutions in our hand if we get our hands unshackled.
Thanks, John. Thanks, panellists. You have a very good summary there of what they're doing. You'll have picked up a number of common themes there, and as well as those individual aspects of their own individual businesses. So, like I said, we're going to open up to the floor. I'm going to invite questions. Jason will get a mic to you if you want to raise your hand, and we'll maybe start with our first question. Yep, down here, please. And like I said, if you don't mind introducing yourself. And
thanks, Jason. Jerry Boyle is my name. At the moment, I'm chair of ARCZero. And just want to thank the 4 speakers, because you're clearly at the forefront of this whole endeavour. One question I have, and certainly it's been very contentious in the South, and you've alluded to, all of you, but I'd like some maybe hard facts on it. Over the last 3 years, how much have you reduced your chemical N by, and what's been the biggest challenge in doing that? Thank you.
Okay, we had a couple of you already admitted that you have that addiction, as you put it, I think, towards chemical nitrogen. So, Hugh, do you want to tackle that one first of all?
Yeah, we have a huge demand for winter forage on our farm, and a lot of our farm is used for that process, so we cut silage 4 times, and there is a requirement there for it. Where we have seen a reduction is around our grazing platform, where we can introduce clover and multi-species swards. I would say, shooting from the hip, we've probably reduced it by about 10%. It's a slow burn, Jerry. We're trying to get pHs right and, get those indices in the soil right to try and reduce it going forward. It's going to be a slow journey for us, but hopefully we should get there. But quite a lot of that has been driven, as Ian said, on price as much as anything to try and reduce our costs. We're trying to make better use of our slurry as well, which we maybe haven't mentioned as well, through better application techniques. And we're now spreading slurry on the grazing platform, whereas we never used to going forward, and we're seeing better quality grass as a result of that.
Ian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it was just as I got into ARCZero, bought a dribble bar for the slurry tanker, and that was one way, as most dairy farmers know, you're sowing after every rotation, or excuse me, you're sowing around every rotation after the cows, or once monthly, but you're putting on a basic application per cow at a stage. So with the dribble bar, you were able to go in and cut out one of those applications. So last year we cut nitrogen use by 23%, but now I'm not saying that was all down to, there was weather and there was price implications involved in that. So, but we're doing our best, and we're introducing clover and trying to get clover built up on the farm to do away with some of the fertilizer as well.
Okay, thanks, Ian. John?
Yeah, well, similar to Ian, we have reduced our fertiliser usage by about 20%. It's a number of reasons as well. Getting the pH right, introducing the clover, although a lot of our clover was only introduced last year, and it'll be this year, hopefully, that we'll see a more substantial reduction in that. Being more chemical smart or nitrogen smart has been a big thing too. We bought a GPS system for the tractor so that we're more efficient in the way we spread the fertiliser. And fertiliser was cheap, and if we wanted grass, we went out and sowed fertiliser to get grass. We have had to become a little bit more savvy in that and try and produce the grass with sowing a bit less fertiliser. And it's a work in progress.
Patrick, yeah.
Sorry, can I say something else? But I won't be apologetic for sowing fertiliser. We're getting a good response from it. We're growing 12.5 tonnes of dry per hectare on the farm. What we have done on our own farm is that we've moved from using calcium ammonium nitrate to using protected ureas. So, as far as I'm concerned, we can still sow fertiliser as long as we're getting the response from it. I think the problem lies within the industry where the soil indices aren't right, pHs are low, and people are sowing artificial fertiliser in the wrong place and not getting the response from it. So I don't think it's something that we shouldn't say that we're not going to sow artificial nitrogen. Yeah. It's a thing that we should be using correctly at the right time of the year, and using it properly is more of an issue, I think.
Yeah, there is only one consequence of not using artificial fertiliser, and that is half the world's population will have to go because we can't produce enough food otherwise. So, that is the reality, for me as farmers. The guys have all made that point very well. We recognise there's work to do, but those sorts of figures, I think, of a 10 to 20% reduction, I think are probably a good sort of industry sort of gauge. I would have thought, Jerry, on where we need to be going to. So, okay, Paddy, do you want to come in? Or
well, just to say, similar sorts of reduction, partly driven by putting in multi-species swards where we've used no fertiliser on them at all. So there's a chunk of the farm has received no nitrogen in the last 3 years at all. And then the clover has kicked in a big way by adjusting our pH. And that's not, I haven't had to sow any clover into the swards. This is existing wild white clover that has just simply blossomed, as it were. We have fields that are now white with clover flowers. It is fantastic and is contributing a vast amount of nitrogen, which means that we don't have to rely on bag nitrogen in the same way. Though our usage was very low indeed before that, and that's one of the contributory factors to why my carbon position is actually very low. We've reached the net zero because actually the usage of nitrogen fertilizer on the farm was already low, but it's even lower now.
Okay, thanks. But we have a question from the back. I may not allow everybody just to answer because that may stop us going through all the questions. So, question from the back, Cormac, please.
Thanks, John. Cormac McKervey, Ulster Bank. just on the flip side to Jerry's question, in terms of, he talked about input, but in terms of output, do any of the panel feel that they're going to have to reduce stock numbers as they look into the future to get to that net zero, particularly in light of the Committee on Climate Change and their fairly scary figures?
And maybe directed towards our beef and sheep and maybe one of our dairy farmers, if everyone wants to pick it up. John, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I'll pick it up first. I don't intend to reduce my livestock. We have a certain amount of money to make. If reducing livestock can make that same amount of money, we will, but I can't see us reducing livestock. That's my personal opinion.
My tenant Trevor has had a very careful look at his livestock numbers and actually did reduce by a few, simply using the fact that his input, he was going to be making less winter forage because of reducing nitrogen inputs. He was going to have to keep a little bit less, a few fewer cows, and he used the opportunity to get rid of a lot of the poorer performing animals and to replace them with slightly smaller breed. So he's gone into Solaris cattle, and he's sort of slightly changed the, if you like, the breeding of the cows to get a cow that actually produces more from less, I think, very good on poorer forage, perhaps. So there's been a slight shift there, driven by the recognition that there may be a lower grass production on the farm with slightly reduced nitrogen levels. But it's an adjustment, I would have said, rather than a major reduction in stock.
Okay, we have a question here, have we, Jason?
Hi, Alistair Carston at Derry. Hugh, really interested just in your comment around using protected urea. Just be interested to hear your observations around that, because obviously type of nitrogen fertilizer is a big impact as well as level. And just ask the other panel members, have they changed type of fertilizer? And if I could ask just one on methane, if John, obviously in terms of the methane perspective, replacement rate is really key, and I recognise that you're really at high levels of technical efficiency, but just had there been, through this period of time, have you seen any potential to reduce replacement rate by calving earlier, use of sex semen, those types of things with it on the methane side? But the first one was just to hear how you've got on with protected urea, Hugh, and just ask the other panel members, have they considered change of type of fertiliser?
Okay, thanks, Alistair. Hugh, you want to take that?
You got a lot of questions in there for the first question about the protected urea. We've noticed it's actually worked quite well on our farm, particularly at these sorts of weather conditions. We've also the protected urea that we're applying also has sulphur in it, so we're getting sulphur in with it as well. I think it's just another tool in the armoury, let's say, to try and bring those figures down. The question on methane there, you can see in our results, we only had a 2% or 5% reduction in our agri-calc calculations this year. That was due to we had really bad fertility, not really bad. We try and get 75 to 80% of our cows calve in 6 weeks. We had a bad batch of semen. We only got a 30% conception to that, which threw our calving interval back, and that had a subsequent fall in milk production during that year, and that had a big effect on our methane emissions because our calving interval was longer and the fertility was worse. So we're also trying on our farm to try and, as I said before, reduce the cow size a bit. We've got cows that are 550, 600 kilos producing 710 kilos of milk solids, and to my mind, those are the cows that are very efficient. They're very efficient at converting grass, converting meal into what we want them to do, rather than having a 800 kilo cow producing 700 kilos of milk solids. So we're also using genetics to try and do that as well. Looking at trying to use the best genetics for that to try and get the perfect animal for the farm, but it's not easy getting everything right all the time.
I think Hugh's story there is actually very interesting, very honest, Hugh, because that does highlight the practical realities of trying to do this as a farmer dealing with livestock. This is what happens, so you can have all the policy and all the direction you want, but if none of that allows the flexibility to deal with real life, real farming issues, then it isn't going to work properly. So I think that's a really, although I'm disappointing, for you not great, but like from terms of this process, a great example to us all of what it's like in real life.
But that's farming. It's never perfect. It's it's a work in progress all the time, and you have to accept the ups and the downs with it.
I think maybe we had a question over here, I think.
Morning, Esther Skelly-Smith from the North of Ireland Veterinary Association. This is a fantastic morning and great to hear what you are all doing. I wear two hats. I'm involved as a vet and also as a sheep farmer. This has been fascinating from a point of view of soil health and all of that side of things. As we are looking, or John alluded to, how are you looking on the farms towards animal health around this side of the equation, looking at that whole One Health approach that John mentioned earlier? Or are we too early in that process yet?
I was also involved in the anthelmintic study with Gillian and ARCZero again, another EIP project. So the animal health side was discussed at the farm walk at our house. And listen, efficiency is key to carbon. At the end of the day, if you're not efficient, the more efficient you are, the less carbon you're using. So a lot of the studies have been done. It doesn't really matter what system you're using. I just think of dairy. I don't really worry about it. As I'm very ignorant to the thing. But in the dairy system, whether it's a spring calving system or all year round, indoor, fully housed, doesn't matter. It's efficiency. Efficiency drives your carbon down and your carbon. So on the animal health side, we looked into the anthelmintics, reducing dosage and worm count and stuff like that. So it's key to your efficiencies. At the end of the day, if you don't have good animal health, you'll not have anything else will follow that. Everything else follows the animal health end of things.
Patrick, you want to comment? Yeah.
Just to comment on that, one of the benefits of multi-species swards, especially those containing chicory and plantain, is that they are natural anthelmintics, and one can actually reduce one's worm burden simply by having a grazing block of multi-species swards that you keep your sheep flock particularly on, but cattle as well. It'll have a positive effect on their health and their productivity. And as Ian has said, if you can actually finish your animals quicker and with less inputs, you're better off. Your carbon position is better off. So it's a win-win there. And I think that and the animals are healthier as well. So I think there's a lot of. It's a really interesting aspect, and we actually had a session as a group from a vet in England talking about the impact of animal health on our carbon positions, and I think it made a big impression on all of us. And I think we've all been thinking much more about having a health plans for our flocks and herds to ensure that we do the very best in terms of animal health, because it is a major contributor to our carbon position.
Yeah, great question, Esther, actually, and great lessons being learned from this, but actually you can take it beyond what we're doing in terms of animals. You can look at this from a human perspective. That One Health message has been demonstrated here on a livestock basis. It's something we should be applying across ourselves, across as a wider society. Question in here, please.
Thanks so much. Hi, I'm Sam Royston. I'm from DEFRA. And obviously it's great to hear about your efforts. You guys are on the front line and sort of leading the way. Are you feeling or seeing more pressure coming from sort of downstream in your supply chain or from any other actors to be measuring and reducing your carbon?
Yes. No, look, yeah, we are. We supply a farmer-owned cooperative, and they're obviously getting pressure putting down on them from customers, and they're doing what they always do and put pressure on us. But the question I have back to the processors is, what are they doing to try and reduce their carbon footprint? Kind of feels as if from a farm that they're always trying to put the pressure on us to try and do it. And what I would like to see from the total supply chain is that, everybody tries throughout the supply chain to try and do it less food waste in the supermarkets and the consumers, and better processing techniques of the product, better transport arrangements, that sort of thing. So it has to be a full package in my eyes. It's not just the farmer that can brunt their responsibility for this.
John,
yeah. I deal with ABP for my sins, and they have started.
Sorry, George Mullen is here, by the way. So next question will be from George Mullen.
I wouldn't say it's pressure. You know, I'd say they're trying to replicate what we're doing. I would say we're more leaders, and they're trying to encourage other farmers to do likewise what we're doing. They can see that the consumer wants. This is what the consumer wants. You know, they want carbon efficient farmers. It's pretty much the buzzword at the minute, and everybody wants on the bandwagon.
I picked up one point, John, that you mentioned. You talked about 3 years doing this again. You know, that the testing. I mean, one of the things we're noticing is, you know, what the point we made here. There is that drive from retail to processor. They want this done almost on a 6-monthly basis. And really, you know, I suppose I've taken that message what you said earlier, that really that's to be effective. You have to give it that little bit of time.
Our experience is there's a lot of work goes into doing a calculator. It's really onerous, and I'm surprised none of them have said just, you know, and I know the AgriCalc team are here too. You know, there's a lot of work from their parts, a lot of work from the farmer's part, putting it all together. If you make people do it every 6 months, every year, you know something, you will absolutely lose them. There has to be a halfway house. You do it because you want to pick up change. You do it because you want to give messages back. But doing it every single year, I think, is madness. I think it's too bureaucratic, too costly. So certainly for us, in regards to life cycle assessment calculators, I would have done my second one 3 years into it, and my third one 2 years into it, 2 years after that. Because you actually need, you know, we need to get our heads around it. What does it mean? And as Hugh flagged up, and I think 3 of them flagged up, a lot of the changes, you know, they put in last year, but they won't actually see the benefit. You know, if I did AgriCalc now in 2024, actually these guys' figures would be better again, because the legume benefit, it takes a while. So I think there is a halfway house between beating up primary producers and actually winning hearts and minds and getting them to go on the journey. So certainly our steer from our experience here, do your second one 3 years in, do your third one 2 years after that, and do it, you know, every 2 years. Doing it every year, I think it's madness. Doing it every 6 months, you will just piss off. So many farmers will walk away from it.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, we have time for maybe one more or two more questions. So one just here. Right. Okay. We'll come to you next. Okay.
There is another session after.
Yeah, and yes, I mean some of the questions. I don't mind actually. These guys won't mind, you know, being part of. They won't be on the stage. They won't mind answering any questions through that second session. But go on ahead.
Hi, Don. Gary Bryce from Points Pass. You were talking about efficiency is key to this. If you're under TB restriction, which maybe you have or haven't been, how does that affect your efficiency carrying extra stock that normally you wouldn't carry? How does that fit in with the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it throws it out. I can tell you right now. I mean that just, you know, things like TB just completely pull the rug from below all of this work. If we're honest about it, and that's why we have a strategy looking at addressing the TB issue. Anybody else in the panel want to just specifically?
Well, I'll say, like, we've on and off we've had TB issues, and it's a bugger. So this, I'm almost 60 years of age now, and as long as I remember, we're TB testing, and we're not one bit further on than we were when it started. I sell breeding heifers in calf, and it really messes my system up when I go down with TB. It's 6 months before you're clear, and then you've had to carry extra in-calf heifers, probably even calve them. And it really messes the whole thing up. I wish with all my heart that somebody would sort it out soon.
We're on the journey, John. Trust us, we're on the journey. I'm trying to fit two really quick questions in. So was it here? Somebody had a hand? Yeah, here it is here, yeah. And then just final question down here for this session.
Seamus McCormick, Danske Bank, and also a suckler and sheep farmer in North Antrim, farming very marginal land. Going back to a sort of a practical question about application of lime, both Patrick and John alluded to it. Which do you feel is best, refined lime or granulated lime? And also, from a conacre perspective, what do you feel is the best way to incentivise landowners to allow people taking their land to get lime applied, which in turn will reduce the application of fertiliser and improve animal health?
Yeah, I think maybe Patrick, if I let you answer that, I think you're best.
Well, it's a bit of horses for courses here. I've used the granulated lime on existing grassland where there's existing clover, and that has really been incredibly successful for me. But where we've been reseeding and I've ploughed the ground, I put on the ground limestone to get it into the ground and to get a slower burn and a longer lasting, hopefully, product. That would be my view on that. With regard to the landlord-tenant thing, complicated. In my arrangement, I'm responsible for liming the ground. So that's why I would still describe myself as a land manager in a sense, in that I do take certain responsibilities there. So I have taken that on as part of my role within the partnership, is ensuring that we keep the pH right. And I think that's been an important part of it, because it does mean that it does happen, because I've got a long-term interest in my land. Under a Conacre agreement, the tenant may not have a long-term interest, may only have a short-term. As it happens in my case, there is a long-term interest, but that's the way we've divided the responsibilities on the farm. But I think that would probably be the best way forward, to take some sort of account of that within the tenancy agreement. And it is important, I think, in a Conacre one, that you do have an agreement that sets out who's doing what on the farm, rather than just making assumptions that someone's going to do it somewhere.
But you know, Northern Ireland desperately needs a farm business tenancy sort of agreement in place. This 10-month Conacre agreement we seem to be obsessed with is prehistoric, and we need some sort of legislation to come into place where we can have a tenancy for 5-10 years going forward, because you can see it's important to have the secure of the land to try and improve it for that time.
Yeah, I was just going to mirror what Hugh has just said. There needs to be, because anybody sowing lime this year, you're not going to get the benefit the next year. If you're taking Conacre, you mightn't have it next year. So it's a very hard one. The granulated lime's quick working, yes, but you really need the ground. And in my eyes, you really need the ground lime, and to give it the real substance and give it the long burn. So.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question now. Like I said, there will be a second panel discussion where we can come around to some of these again, but one last brief question and brief answer, please.
Hello, my name is Lyndon Edwards. I'm an organic dairy farmer from Gloucestershire, and I'm also chair of the dairy sector of HDB. With all the soil testing that you've done and looking for these win-wins, and you've talked a lot about lime, is there any other elements that you're looking at to actually carry on the win-wins? I know that on my own farm, we did a lot of work when I went organic, and there was other elements that were equally as good for win-wins as lime were. I didn't know whether you'd looked into that at all yet.
Yep. John, you want to go first?
Yeah, just briefly, there's a guy, he's Guy Binions, he's a retired scientist, and he's actually doing work on multi-species that I have, and where he's adding salt, and the figures aren't out yet. He took the soil samples this year, and he's growing them in a greenhouse and adding salt. So it's a work in progress, but we are looking at it.
Yeah, well, we have very high magnesium soils, which you probably don't have in your neck of the woods. 5, 6s, all that. Oh, you do, you northern you do. And we've, off the back of that, we've started to sow calcifer, which is basically gypsum, to try and mitigate that. We're kind of hoping our soil would be very wet. We're kind of hoping it improves drainage and also helps plant growth as well. So we're chasing quite high pHs as well. 6.5 to 7s to try and bring that magnesium level down a bit.
John mentioned earlier that we are looking to a future program to carry ARCZero forward, and one of the things we're going to be looking at is soil health, I think, in much more depth. And obviously micronutrients of one sort or another will be part of that investigation. It'll be about the actual soil biota, the respiratory activity as well, but it's part of our, I think, thinking for a future program for ARCZero to carry the work forward, because anything that can improve our performance and our carbon position is what we're aiming for. So we're going to investigate all these things.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the questions. John, you intimated that there was a certain element of shyness amongst the panelists. I don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. We will have we're going to have a short break now, then we're going to have a further panel discussion, and we will return to these types of questions, and so thank you. So welcome back to our second panel session for the afternoon. We have Ian, we have John, Simon and Roger on the panel to take your questions. I found the first panel discussion very interesting. We got into a lot of the technical aspects. That is brilliant. I'm going to make a request to you, and it's for my own benefit because it interests me. I'm interested in a little bit of the mindset of these guys, why they did this, why they did it in the first place, why they want to continue doing it, what benefits they see from it. So I don't want to stop any other questions, but if you can kind of help me understand them a little bit, I think that will help us all to understand how we then take this message possibly further. So again, I'm going to ask them to do a brief. No, you're okay. You're not getting a question yet, Kevin. So just hold on. So we're going to ask them to do a brief introduction of themselves, just on a little bit of their journey so far. John, I'll start with you. So.
Well, I don't know, Chair, if they need to hear anything more from me.
Okay, you don't need to. You're done then, right? Okay. Simon.
Thank you, John. Simon Best, an arable and beef farmer from Points Pass on the Armagh Down border. I farm in partnership with my father and brother, about 1,200 acres of cereals, oilseeds, beans, and then some grassland for our cattle. We're very focused, I suppose, on sustainability, and I guess a lot of our markets are very close by, focused on short supply chains. 85% of what we produce is sold within sort of 4 or 5 miles of the farm. We're also, I think, as John touched on earlier, we're a leaf farm, so essentially we grow our produce to on a higher level environmental stewardship. So 10% of the farm is in both managed and natural habitat, which we focus very hard on and certainly have done over the years. I suppose that the driver behind that has been trying to open niche markets. Some have been better than others. Our oats particularly are a crop that we certainly are able to trade on that. We originally provided or grew for Jordan's through Whites under their scheme and now more recently under Leaf.
Okay.
Then I'll go back to the bit on why afterwards.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Simon. Thank you very much. Roger.
Hi. My own.
Yeah, I think so.
Hi.
The one that doesn't work.
That might be better. There might be a reason for that. Right. So I'm Roger Bell. Ballymena, County Antrim, farming 600 sheep and finishing 70 cattle. Why did John pick me in this? I do not know. What a challenge he's had, and he has stepped up to that challenge at every turn. I would count myself quite intense, in fairness, and we have been doing our soil tests, and we've been doing that every year the last 10 or 12 years. So we're trying to be efficient farmers. Yes, there's always a bit of room to be more efficient, but it has been a challenge. It has been very, very good. It has been fantastic. John has had a great passion for it, and that's where we are.
Thanks, Roger. And you'll notice on the screen and stuff, you see Roger always appears with Hilary, his wife. I wanted her to come up onto the stage here, but she point blank refused to. And I think Roger, you'll be the first to admit, and I think everybody on the panel, you know they're here as individuals, but they are part of a wider team, whether that's a partner, a wife, a son. We've already had grandchildren mentioned. I mean, that's very much part of this as well. So let's go to the floor. We'll take questions, and let's just see where we go. First question. All right, sorry, Kevin, I'm going to have to go to you.
Hi, everyone. I've already introduced myself. So it was just on what you mentioned, John, about the mindset. So for me, I've been trying to do things in the trust, particularly around herbalize. And the big thing in farming is, how do we not care about what the neighbour over the hedge thinks? And then also, how do we get them in to the field and not just looking over the hedge? So to grow this sort of movement of what needs to happen.
John, I'll let you start.
Can you hear me okay? Not that anyone's ever complained that they couldn't hear me before. I think we're all going on a journey here. And the big journey, I always say, the 20th century was about chemistry, the 21st century will be about biology. Certainly in my journey, and I went to Groundswell last year in England, which is for regenerative agriculture. If I could bottle the passion that I saw in Groundswell, I would be a millionaire many times over. But what I was missing was the data. And actually, I find that farmers like evidence before they go. They like to see the data. I had the privilege when I worked with Devonish, Jean Kennedy's here today, and she led a great bid, and we actually started to put the data around regenerative agriculture, multi-species swords. Jane and Connie have been fundamental in that project to get data. And and there's also a lot of skepticism. I mean, there's skepticism also within the advisory bodies. And, there are 2 advisory bodies on this island. I don't need to name them. But, they also are struggling with this journey because we're changing from a journey of perennial ryegrass and synthetic nitrogen to actually going back to using biology, doing something that our grandfathers knew, but we didn't know the evidence around, didn't understand the science behind it. So I think now, AFP CAFRI are doing work, Chagas are doing work, Devonish were doing work. We're now beginning to see a lot of data coming out, and I think that's fundamental because actually people are not going to going cold turkey. If you're addicted to nitrogen, going cold turkey after you plant legumes is really difficult. You heard several of my colleagues here in the previous session. That's really difficult. Now, the bit that Hugh didn't say is that actually I take my hat off to him on his multi-species. He went absolutely cold turkey. So he went beyond where I had suggested, which was reduce it by 2/3. So on his Hugh, where are you? Where are you hiding? Okay, you went completely cold turkey in the multi-species, apart from story with dribble bar between every grazing, no nitrogen at all. And we need to get more of those case studies out there so farmers get to see. We had when Hugh had his farm walk. We had 250 people turned up to see that. I'm a great believer on demonstration farm networks. Is peer-to-peer learning by far the best way. I'm sorry for the academics and scientists in the room, but you're not the world's best communicators. You may have very good science, but something, peer-to-peer learning. And I mentioned earlier on, every single feedback questionnaire we had, loved the host farmer, loved the host farmer. And I think that is absolutely fundamental how we get this behavioural change.
Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I guess, why did we get involved in this? And essentially, it's back to, John says this a lot, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And, it's either you can't or if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. I think we've always tried to apply that across the board. And for me as a farmer, particularly as an arable farmer, you're looking at your sort of annual cycle and you're wondering how you've done every year, and you can gauge that with your yield at the end of the year. And I think for me, the desire to have a baseline and a verifiable baseline was a key driver behind it. And I think certainly, it comes back to, there's one thing sticks in my mind, it's around life cycle assessments. I did 2 sort of random ones about 4 years ago, and they put up 2 completely different pictures. So I think that was the reason for me to sort of want to sort of take a bit more control of it, and to join a group of like-minded people who were prepared to really get stuck into it. I think was a big key driver.
Roger, I was on your farm yesterday, and it was very obvious to me that you take great pride in that piece of land that you manage up in that nice part of the world around Kells. And have you found, and taken on from Kevin's point, that this experience has made you maybe more appreciative of that little bit of ground, or has that been part of it?
Very much so. We would be very passionate about our bit of farming, like we are farmers, and we're just there to try and earn money, and we need to earn money from farming. To sort of answer your question about your neighbour, the neighbours say, "What's that lead you at now? Look, he's sowing a field of Dawkins and he's trying to graze them," and but that sort of year and a half later, 2 years later, and he sees that field of Dawkins doing really well and carrying twice the amount of stock that he has and half the fertiliser. He soon comes round, and then he gives in to you someday and sort of asks you, right, what is that? Is it hard to grow? And he starts to ask the questions. So your neighbour's probably, it's the first one to criticise you and have a wee laugh, but he's the first one to ask you the question, right, maybe I need to look into this.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Question over here, I think.
Hi, James Trotman, Barclays Bank. We've heard a lot of the sort of benefits so far. We've heard environmental benefits, we've heard societal benefits, we've heard profitable benefits and efficiency benefits. So I suppose my question is, you're now coming up to the stage of win-lose, and what does the lose look like, and what is your motivator to continue on that pathway to the win?
That's a good question. Takes a bank manager to ask that question.
Briefly now, John, because
Well, I might give you two examples of win-lose. Methane feed inhibitors, feed additives. That is a win, but they're costing, okay? And, you know, if people are serious that they want us to go down that path, okay? And I'm not convinced they totally are yet. That's a win-lose, and we're going to have to crack that one, okay? Likewise, silver pasture, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon. Silver pasture has a huge potential, and we've got some really good data here. But it's a cost. You know, that's a win-lose. But it delivers multiple wins, but we haven't got the finances right, okay? So we do need to, I mean, one of the things we wanted to flush out is when we start to explore, and we've put up as one of our aims up there, is we would like to get help to go and explore the win-lose and actually understand the economics there, because only then can we feed it back to policy and say, listen, here's the positive side of it, but here's the financial externality. What can you do to help us on that?
Oh.
So you need those pilots. You need real farmers to go and stick their nose in it, rub the edges off it, and find out the true cost.
Okay, another question here, please.
My name is Philip McDonough. I'm at Dublin City University, and we have a multi-stakeholder project on resilience in food systems. And John has given us wonderful advice, and we're very drawn to this model of pursuing multiple public goods at the same time. So I just wonder, would the panelists have anything to say about new forms of funding and also about new ways to use local government in support of these complex changes?
Yeah, I'll maybe direct that one to Roger, if you don't mind. I mean, and that very much follows. I'm giving you a wee bit of chance, Roger, and that very much follows on from the banking question, though. And that takes into that sustainability, which is profit. I mean, one of those pillars, that profitability pillar within sustainability. I mean, if this doesn't, if these farmers, I mean, farmers don't like to mention the word profit, but you've heard it mentioned already today about the next generation, and they won't be there if there's not a profitable business. And that will very much motivate farmers. But I think, Roger, I mean, you're very much a practical farmer. I mean, profit is key to this.
Yeah, I did tell you I was a sheep farmer, and if you want to know how to lamb a ewe, come in March time and I'll show you. I could answer that question really well. Like, I need to run a profitable business, bottom line. That's what I said to John when we started this project. Like, you know, because all I had heard about carbon was, you know, you need to cut stock, you need to do this. My farm will not survive cutting stock. You know, it has to be profitable. I've bills to pay, family to keep, and a farm to run. So we do need more funding, we do need money. And that's for a whole lot smarter people than me to sort out, but there's a lot of questions to answer in this. I think we're lucky we have somebody like John that's passionate about trying to get to the bottom of these questions. So, yeah, I don't know if that sort of answers your question or not.
No, thank you. I'll maybe bring John in, actually, John, to...
Well, so, the scale of the challenge that society is asking of us as farmers is we are going to need all sorts of funding to help us. But I will argue, I will take anyone's money, but I need it on the right terms, and to do that, they need to be comfortable and we need to be comfortable. And that is, what's the baseline and how am I going to be measured? You know, I gave evidence last week at the EFRA Select Committee in the House of Commons, and they asked me about private sector money over public sector money. And I said, listen, we're going to need both, but if we don't have a baseline and a proper measuring, reporting and verification scheme around one direction of travel, how do you know you're going to get value from money? How does the farmer know they're not going to get ripped off? So actually, regardless of who funds this journey, key in that is you need a really good baseline, and you need to know upfront how they're going to measure, report and verify. Both the people paying for it and the farming community are going to deliver it. Because the farming community has been burnt before by little private sector initiatives, and we need it open and transparent. So right at the core of the principles of ARCZero is we've really focused on the measuring, reporting, and verifying to build the integrity. And that's fundamental to unlock money from whatever source it comes from.
Okay, another question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Helena Black from AgriCarbon and also the UK Farm Soil Carbon Code Consortium, worst project name in the world. I'm a soil scientist, but I'm actually going to ask...
Maybe hold a wee bit closer?
Can I hold it a bit closer?
That's brilliant.
I'm usually another one that's said not very quiet. So I'll try again, John.
It's the rain.
Let's try again, it's the rain. I'm a soil scientist, but I'm actually going to follow up a little bit more on what you have just been answering the question to. So there's always sticks in farming, but I'm after where are the carrots? So you just talked about, you guys have been through this journey, you've generated all this evidence. Do you actually see the opportunity to use that evidence now to actually negotiate within your supply chain? And if you can't see that now, what needs to happen to change to make you the people that can drive and negotiate what happens in the future?
Okay, Simon, yeah, you mentioned your association with whites for one in the past, so yeah, it might be.
Yeah, and I suppose a follow-on exactly to the previous, and I guess another big reason for getting involved in this is to establish what that value might be, and that we as farmers are actually empowered with that knowledge before it is sort of potentially taken away by stealth, and I think that's important. And, I mentioned earlier about supply chains and how we want to be integrated, we want to be mutually beneficial in those supply chains. And I think this is certainly something in the future that, and maybe the near future, that's going to be right up there as an opportunity for everybody to share. But it's important, I think, for farmers fundamentally to know what they've got. And particularly, if you do start to intervene now and make improvements, that you actually can potentially get the value, from having an initial baseline.
Okay, we have another question, just one here.
Thank you. Paul Turley, beef farmer in Downpatrick. We've partially started this journey as well. One comment from our own experience is that the change of mindset was difficult for myself or anybody who was on a high nitrogen system, and I want, how can we encourage more to do that? But this is a bigger problem for me, and it may be for a lot of other farmers, is we don't like data, we don't like form filling. And I'm going now towards getting our AgriCalc or whatever it is. I'm on my second one now, and thankfully some of the representatives from AgriCalc have been helping me along the way, and I find that a very difficult journey. It's hard to sift out all the information. Are we going to be able to tap in and coordinate where data already exists? For example, on APHIS, it's a must. APHIS have a 6-monthly count. AgriCalc require a 12-monthly count. There are things in there where there's overlaps of data, and it needs to be easier for me as a farmer, because I will go to a certain point and then I get fed up with it and I'll throw it in the drawer and it won't get done. And I would think that's quite common among farmers.
Yep, that is very common, Paul, exactly, and you heard Hugh talk about it earlier in the earlier panel discussion. I'll throw it open. Roger? Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Look, it was a bit of a challenge for us too as well, and we are into our figures. We measure and weigh everything. We measure our grass every week, we weigh our lambs every week, and we're very much into our figures, for we're very much data driven. But it is still a challenge, and we do need to make that easier, in fairness. And there is win-wins there. There's definitely things we can do. So, yeah, that's just some of the challenges we're going to have.
And I think, that APHIS information will pre-populate onto AgriCalc, to make it that little bit simpler. And John mentioned the fact that will evolve, it can continually evolve. It's all test and learning. So I think hopefully as we progress with this, we will see that all getting more farmer friendly.
Paul, if I had a big wish, okay, is one vehicle that is pre-populated by the APHIS. So for the people who aren't familiar with APHIS, that's Northern Ireland's animal movement system, and also the information coming out of the soil nutrient health scheme around nutrient loading on farms, so that you actually, if you can get as much of that pre-populated. The other thing I would say, our experience with any life cycle assessment, but we used AgriCalc, our experience is we paid our money and we got an SAC consultant to help us, because actually it's not simple. It's not just going on. And one of the challenges to all calculator providers is how do you do that interface between your calculator and the farmers you're trying to get information out of. And there's a lot more work needs to be done there. I'm just really glad, and they're having a giggle here in front of them because they know they've had emails at me from 2 o'clock in the morning saying, don't know if this squares up, and and just having that critical friend to the process. It's a challenging journey, the one that we're going to have to get smarter at.
Okay, I've been given my 2-minute warning, so I'm passing that on to you. There are going to be more questions and we're going to have time to answer, but we will try and rattle through a couple more. One here to begin with, and then we'll come to yourself, sir.
Thank you. Hi, Jessica Armstrong from AgriCalc. John's maybe alluding. But I guess some of the question relates to Kevin's question and some of this, which is, what was the importance of working within a group of farmers, working in a cooperative, having support from consultants throughout the process? What did that do for you? Did it make you feel more comforted through it or confident?
Simon, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it again links back to the previous question in that no two farms are the same. And I think that's the important thing. There had to be dynamism and discussion and open discussion a lot of the time. So yeah, look, I think we had a very good group. John touched on it in his keynote speech about just the standard of some of the guys involved there. They're all guys who aren't afraid to put their necks in the line, their results up there, and to actually stand up and promote good practice because they've been doing it for years. So I think having that sort of collaboration, having John led us as a team, and I think that's important. If you get the culture right, everything else will follow. So I think it was excellent on that front. But I think the fact that we were diverse across the board. There were, yes, a couple of dairy farmers, but in around that there was other enterprises well represented. So to have that and be able to challenge and look at opportunities around that, I'll give one example. Ian McClelland is very close to me at home, and I've used liquid fertilizer for years. So Ian expressed an interest in trying that. So it was a great opportunity for me to, I suppose, integrate with Ian, see how that worked in his grassland, and those are the sort of collaborations that I think on the ground can happen when you're in a small tight group.
Okay, thank you. Question here, please.
Yeah, Stephen Briggs, farmer in Cambridgeshire and AHDB board member. Picking up on one of the comments from earlier on, I mean, clearly the farmers involved in this ARCZero are leading the way, and if there's a recognition that we need to move on this as a farming industry and swiftly. Those farmers that are like yourselves in this group making great strides, how do we square the circle of additionality? How do we square the circle where the farmers that are already leading and doing great stuff are rewarded from that, rather than actually standing back and waiting for all the perfect measurements to be put in place, recognizing that the greatest gains are from starting from a lowest point? How do we square the circle of additionality and rewarding on those gains that have already taken place?
John?
Stephen, you're looking at the wrong person. I spent my life getting beaten up because I had a go at it. At least when I'm buried, they'll say, at least he had a go, okay? For me, as a society, we don't do this well. We don't encourage entrepreneurship and innovation and leadership. We wait until we're averaged, and policy only picks you up once the innovators have died, and then picks you up. So we don't do this well. This time round, and you'll learn later on, it's public knowledge. I got absolutely kicked by policy on renewable heat. This is me coming out of the Phoenix side of it. So I've still got some very large scars. At least this time what I decided to do, I was going to make sure we did it so well evidenced that if I had a bun fight with a policymaker, I was going to have plenty of evidence to take to whatever magistrate I had to take. So we don't do this well. And we need, and part of the compliment I would give to the EIP project, and I know Deirdre here and quite is actually there is recognition that we need more of this, not less. And I'm not going to put words into no one's mouth because no one's going to speak in the moment. But I think the EIP, the 7 EIP projects have been some of your best, really innovative projects, and you're seeing the fruit of it today. And answer one of the previous questions. For me, the success of this group is its diversity. As I've learned in multi-species sports, diversity is good. Well, the diversity in this group is good too, because as Simon has interluded, we spark all the time and we see different views, but we come to the centre. And we need that between public policy and also the innovation and innovator and entrepreneurial community, is we need to some way reward that. And we don't. And so I don't have an answer, Stephen. You've asked, as usual, the million-dollar question. And but the day you stop innovators and entrepreneurships is a world I don't want to be in, because actually someone needs to go and have a go at it.
Yep. Thanks, John. We probably have time for one more question, but you will have the opportunity. Everybody's hanging around, hopefully, so you can ask questions as we walk around later on. But is there one more question from the floor for now? Okay, there's not. Well, that's good. We're going to finish on time then. Thank you very much. That brings us to a conclusion of the second panel session. I'd like to thank our panelists. And like I say, there will be that opportunity when we network later on to have further discussions. So perhaps you want to show a round of applause maybe for our panelists.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. And I think when John asked me to come and talk about reflections, I think I took it as a license to ramble on for 10 minutes with no particular purpose. But I think, yeah, we possibly need to. But I think I will try and confine it to the ARCZero project and innovation partnership approach more generally. Innovation partnerships were really born out of the last rural development programme. And not something that we'd ever really encountered before. I think it's probably fair to say that we were probably a bit wary of this approach, even sceptical in terms of what they might be able to achieve in practice. Bringing farmers, growers, researchers, advisors together all sounds very sensible, very logical, but could it actually be made to work in practice? That was the big question. Could it actually achieve focus over a sustained period and credibly deliver outcomes? So these are the big questions. So when we did issue the call for proposals, we had thoughts of maybe funding maybe 3 or 4 projects, just on a pilot basis, give it a go, see how what emerges. Innovation is always about stepping into the unknown, and this really was a step into the unknown. So I think the response we got to that call was probably more than we expected or could even have hoped for. And we got some really good projects, really diverse projects. And Alistair, I think, came to me at that point and said, look, could we not actually fund a few more? And so we ended up funding 7 very diverse projects, bringing together almost 100 farmers, researchers, and advisors in 2020. So it really was a very substantial project for us. And I think it's fair to say that ARCZero has been, from the outset, enjoyed a very high profile. And I think that's in no small part down to John, his energy, his drive, his commitment, and you've certainly seen that today. So I really commend John for that. But it's also a project that came at a really good time because the whole issue of agriculture, carbon was gaining a real prominence, and we were all looking for answers to a very difficult problem, a wicked problem, as they say. So how can agriculture address its very large carbon footprint sustainably, credibly, in a way that's, and it's even been mentioned today, that's not going to require a major downsizing of the sector, which is something that nobody really wants to contemplate. And I think it's clear that there is no single answer to that question, but the work undertaken in this project very much points to soil as being part of the jigsaw, and the architecture, part of the architecture to a solution. So my reflections, I suppose, will very much focus around that soil question. I know the whole farm benchmarking has been really important, but I think the bit that really intrigues me is the role of soil within this problem. I suppose ARCZero really started from a very simple proposition. As John said, know your numbers. How much carbon is locked up in your soil already, and what does that tell us in terms of how to move forward whenever you actually have that information? So by starting to explore that question, that issue, it started to offer glimpses of possibilities going forward in terms of how to manipulate soils to actually store more carbon. No two soils are going to be the same. Management, land use, species composition, they all seem to have an impact. And it's not just about carbon, as John mentioned earlier, biodiversity, nutrient cycling, they're all affected by how we manage and use soils. So the big question, I suppose, for me is how do we quantify that? How do we actually use knowledge to proactively manage soils for carbon or for other outcomes? Do X and you achieve Y. So what's that relationship? And if you know what that relationship is, well, first of all, it has to be repeatable. You have to be able to demonstrate it. But if you know that, then it really opens up possibilities in terms of policy interventions to actually start to deliver policy outcomes, such as carbon capture, but also biodiversity, nutrient cycling, etc. I think one of the great things about ARCZero is that it really has reawakened an interest in soil and its characteristics, and getting 1,000 farmers out on farm walks, I think, really does illustrate that point. I think it's arguably our most valuable resource. If you think on it, that very thin layer, often measured in inches, sustains much of terrestrial life on this planet. And yet, do we fully understand it? Do we understand how to manage it, to sustain it, to value it, to ensure its health? I'm not even convinced that we can define what a healthy soil actually is and how we can maintain soil health. So ARCZero really has reminded us that soil is part of a system, be that a carbon cycle, nutrient cycle. In many ways, it's almost like a living organism. It can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. You can kill it, you can expand it, it can be lost. And we need to think about it probably in those terms and use it and think about different management interventions, but we often abuse soils. We often think about soils purely in terms of, can I get the cows out on it? Are the conditions right to get slurry out? Can I harvest my silage? About trafficability, right, rather than what soil actually is. We manage our crops, we manage livestock, we talk about keeping them healthy, productive, but we don't really talk about managing soils with that same language. And I think that's something that this project starts to reawaken within us. So how do we actually manage soil for carbon, for biodiversity, for nutrient cycling, and probably going forward for water retention? It's probably going to be a bigger issue as we do move forward. And within all of that, you talk about multiple outcomes. What are the trade-offs? What are the conflicts that you have to resolve? Where is the sweet spot within all of that? So I said, ARCZero's reawakened that interest, and if we're going to have those objectives, then we need to understand how we manage our soils better. I think ARCZero probably has raised more questions for our researchers than it has answered. And that's really good. That's a really positive, that's an excellent outcome. Because to my mind, good research is primarily driven by posing good questions. And I think ARCZero has posed some really good questions. And I think that then gives us something to work on going forward. So it's been a significant achievement from 7 businesses participating in the project. But turning more broadly, and John sort of alluded to this, what's the future of innovation partnerships within our new policy agenda? That's currently under review, so I don't really want to preempt the outcome of that process, but we certainly can learn lessons from the programme. we probably need to give a little bit more thought at the very outset as to where those landing zones for those projects are likely to be. Will they inform policy? Will they open up commercial opportunities? Will they be for primarily identifying future research needs? So I think that's something that we probably need to think about right at the very start of any project. Where is it likely to land? Personally, I think I see a real role here for innovation partnerships going forward. I think there's a real space within the policy arena for that. And it's a model that doesn't have to be confined to agriculture. I can see this being used for environmental questions, for forestry, for marine. I think it's got real potential. So I just really want to finish by saying thank you to John and to all of the participants in this particular project, Roger, Hilary, John, Ian, Hugh, Simon, Patrick. I mean, you've been trailblazers, and I think you need to take the credit for that. It's been a remarkable journey, but I think what you have established is a really sound foundation from which we can all move forward. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for today's event, that opportunity to participate in it, but also to learn from it, which I think has been critical. One of the most interesting things that I have found with my new role within the Ulster Farmers Union is I do get to hear many different views from many different farmers on many different issues. And the point was made that farmers may well be underrepresented in the audience here today, but I can assure you that these issues of carbon survey, sequestration, sustainability, they definitely have opinions on it. I was asked to speak recently at the Young Farmers AGM on the topic of sustainability, and I came across this slide. Some of you have already started reading it, but it talks about the use of the word sustainability in the English language over time, and you can see roughly where we are somewhere about now, where it pops up probably more frequently like. But if you look the graph forward, you see by 2036 we're into that, where it's appearing on average once on every page of text. By 2060, it's once in every sentence. I mean, I think Derry are ahead of the curve on that at this point, but and if you look into the start of the next century, the English language just becomes a continual repetition of the word sustainability and nothing else. But obviously, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it does demonstrate that we all can become language ambivalent, and I think that in itself maybe highlights one of the most vital roles of projects like this, where you take the words and you demonstrate it, you turn it into action, and that's what this team of guys have done. And they have demonstrated, I think, maybe firstly to themselves, from speaking to them, that's been maybe obvious to me. This was a little bit of a personal journey for them also, but then also being able to demonstrate that to the wider farming and that wider agri-food sector, and demonstrate that emissions and carbon can be managed at a farm level in a way which is practical, and critically in a way which delivers both for the environment and for farms' profitability. Because that is that second pillar of sustainability. It is about profitability. The third pillar in that temple, I'm sure you're maybe all familiar with it, is about people. And I mentioned at the start of the second session that I wanted to try to get a little bit into the minds of the farmers and what motivated them here. I think that is critical. And I know from talking to them before today, whenever I asked them what made you do this, they say, well, John Gilliland told me to, and they couldn't very well say no. But I think it's obvious from listening to them, you will have picked up that they have actually, they have actually really enjoyed the process. But it is only the start of a process. To me, that's really obvious from today. I mean, there has to be something following on from this. I mean, this good work cannot be now lost. There definitely has to be something which will follow. If you do, you can find anything on the internet, as you all know. I typed in the phrase agricultural psychology, and there is surprisingly little. I was amazed about how little work has been done into what makes farmers do what they do, what makes them think the way they think. And we have lots of research into the science and the technical aspects of environment, carbon, climate change, but there's precious little about what affects behavioural change. And as a consequence, quite often we have policymakers who look to impose new rules with penalty clauses built into them in order to ensure compliance and to try to force that change. Where projects like this are invaluable is that they show a different approach to this. This is about literally from the grassroots up. It's about bringing farmers on that journey through demonstration and what we talk about in terms of peer learning. And that's how we will measure the ultimate worth of what has been done here by this team. It is how that is now picked up and taken forward by the wider agri and agri-food sector. In terms of that psychology, I'll tell you a little bit about it. As a farmer, farmers like to see it. They like to walk it. They very much like to criticize it. And then they like to go home and they like to think about it. And they like to think about, and they actually like to think about how they could improve it as well, if I'm being honest about it. But that's how farmers work. And then they come back and they go, you know what? That's actually not a bad idea. And you've heard a few examples of that today. And that's how it works, ladies and gentlemen. That's how we take it from a genesis through this idea, through this pilot projects, through this into what has to happen next in terms of that wider sustainability issues for the industry. And that's what I think we have the opportunity to do now. And I most certainly hope that that opportunity is not lost at this stage. That would be a terrible travesty. So once again, just to finish, thank you, John, for hosting us today and your hospitality. Thank you for the team of 7 for the pioneering and the leadership work that they have done. And I think, I'm going to speak for you as a group. I think we are going to support you going forward and support this process going forward, and that this journey really takes momentum forward from today's process. So thank you all very much.
I want to say some thank yous. Okay, I first want to say thank you to my 6 colleagues. Without you, none of this could have happened. The diversity, the richness, the not holding back. Yeah, I teased you about being shy. They're never shy. And actually, if you saw some of the photographs before, we also had a lot of fun, okay? Which is really important if you're going to go on a project on that. To Jonathan and his team, Ashley is the silent giant at the back, behind the camera. Ashley was the one who did all the work. He only turned up to get the credit, okay? So thank you. Again, thank you to DERA, and it's not in the room, the European Union, because they co-funded it as well, so better say that, because they might find this on the web sometime, so I better be... But I want to thank all of you for making the effort to actually come to the Northwest, okay? And to actually joining ARCZero. Although this lot of funding has now come to an end, and we haven't gotten any more funding at the moment, I am absolutely serious. We have a passion to drive this. We will be continuing our conversations with funding bodies who want to help us in that, because it's actually unfair to ask the pioneers to do it on their own, okay? So we will be looking for help and support. We see this as chapter 1 coming to an end. But there are many chapters in this book, as John has said, and we as a group would like to get into chapter 2, chapter 3 as such. We hope we will see many of your faces again, and that we will engage backwards and forwards, because at the end of the day, John is absolutely right. This is a pilot. Unless we can get our peers to go on this journey, we've failed, okay? So we have a huge bit, just like when the pilot of the river catchments, we went out, we all put our shoulders together, and farmers changed their behavior when we empowered them. We got a Sonia Chantal scheme, £45 million of investment into this sector because of that. We can do this. Let ARCZero be the catalyst to do something similar, to get a similar funding package to help. So I'm going to stop there about one thing. I want to say thank you to my son David, who always hides at the back, and to Richard, because without David and Richard, they say I do nothing. They say I'm never here. That's probably right. They run the show here, and without them, we could do absolutely nothing. So I'm indebted to David and Devon and my grandkids, but also to Richard as well. So thank you very much.